Agatha Raisin and the Letter That Shouldn't Have Been Found. On a sunny spring morning in Carsely, as Agatha sipped her tea and listened to the gentle hum of village life, an unsigned letter scented faintly of lavender slid under her door, and the village's secrets were about to unravel. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Share your answer in the comments. I always enjoy hearing from our wonderful community. And do not forget to like and subscribe me for more mysteries every day. Now, let's get cozy and dive into tonight's story. Chapter 1. The Quiet Morning That Woke the Village. The morning sun slanted lazily through the tall windows of Agatha Raisin's kitchen, scattering golden light across the neat wooden countertops. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, steam curling upward like a delicate wisp of promise. Outside, the village of Carsely stirred gently. A distant dog barked, the faint rattle of a milk delivery cart rolled along cobblestones, and the chirping of sparrows added an almost musical punctuation to the serene scene. Agatha, in her customary pastel dressing gown, leaned against the counter, cradling a warm china cup of Earl Grey. The aroma of bergamot mingled with the faint scent of scones she had baked the day before. It was a morning of perfect routine, the kind that wrapped around her like a well-loved shawl. She sipped thoughtfully, savoring the peace, letting her mind wander through the comforting patterns of her day. She could hear the soft rustle of the curtains as a playful breeze drifted through the half-open window, and she noticed, with the faintest twinge of irritation, that the small painting above the sink had slipped slightly askew again. It was a minor disturbance, nothing really, but in Agatha's orderly world, even small anomalies drew her attention. Her gaze lingered on it, a silent mental note to fix it after breakfast. And then there was the letter. It had appeared almost imperceptibly, slipped beneath her front door while she had been lost in her morning reverie. At first she hadn't noticed, her foot brushing against the envelope as she stepped toward the window. It was cream-colored, thick and smooth, bearing no stamp, no postmark, no sender. Only the faint curl of lavender-scented air gave it away, a delicate, almost teasing fragrance that pricked at her curiosity. Agatha raised an eyebrow, her mind already flickering with questions. Who could have sent it? Why arrive now, on a morning that had been so unremarkably calm? She picked it up, her fingers brushing the unusual handwriting that swirled across the envelope with an almost theatrical flourish. It was elegant yet unfamiliar, each curve of ink suggesting care, perhaps secrecy. She turned it over in her hands, noting the faint indentation of what might be an old seal, worn by time or travel, and the way the paper seemed just slightly stiff, as if it had been stored somewhere with intention. Agatha set her cup down, feeling a spark of intrigue ignite beneath her usually composed demeanor. Her eyes wandered around the kitchen again. The half-open window rattled slightly in the breeze, and the crooked painting now seemed oddly more pronounced. A small vase that usually held lavender sat slightly askew on the windowsill. Tiny disturbances, almost invisible, yet together they whispered a subtle suggestion that something, or someone, had passed through here recently. It was an unsettling sensation, but one that teased her imagination rather than frightened her. With a quiet sigh, she eased herself into the small wooden chair at the round table by the window. The letter rested there, innocuous yet charged with possibility. Agatha's fingers itched to open it, yet she lingered, letting the anticipation settle in like a warm but tantalizing shadow. Outside, the village continued its gentle awakening, unaware of the mystery now quietly unfolding in one sunlit kitchen. And Agatha, with a faint smile tugging at her lips, knew that the ordinary rhythm of her morning had been irreversibly disrupted. Something unusual had arrived, and she intended to find out exactly what it was. The kettle had cooled, steam vanished, but the letter remained, inviting questions, suggesting secrets, and promising that her day, much like her life in Carsely, was about to become a little more complicated than usual. Agatha placed the envelope on the table and studied it as if it were a curious creature rather than a simple piece of paper. The handwriting was meticulous yet idiosyncratic, each swirl and loop suggesting personality, a hint of the person behind it. She turned the envelope over, examining the back, half expecting a hidden clue, an overlooked mark, a smudge, something that might whisper its origin. There was nothing overt, but the faint trace of lavender lingered, teasing her senses like a mischievous hint of a secret only she could perceive. Agatha's mind began to tick over, her imagination unspooling possibilities with the precision of a well-trained detective, and the humor of a woman who knew her village too well. She carefully slit the envelope, the crisp tears sounding louder than expected in the otherwise quiet kitchen. The letter inside was short, its words deliberate, almost cryptic. A few lines that hinted at concern, curiosity, and a connection she couldn't immediately place. The phrasing was peculiar, familiar in a distant, unidentifiable way, as though it came from someone she had encountered often yet never fully understood. Agatha tapped her finger against the paper, her mind racing through names, faces, and snippets of conversation that had passed through the village in recent weeks. Mrs. Bloxby, with her clipped sentences and sharp eyes, immediately came to mind. She was the type to notice small things and keep them stored in a mental file for later. Then there was the local baker, Mr. Halliday, a man of sudden cheer and occasional cryptic remarks that had always amused Agatha. Even her neighbor Mrs. Penworthy, with her obsession for neat hedges and immaculate teacups, seemed capable of subtle intrigue beneath her polished exterior. Each person had their peculiarities, their quirks, and now, for reasons she could not yet define, one of them might have sent this letter. Agatha leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a small smirk. The village of Carsely, normally serene and predictable, suddenly felt layered, textured with hidden connections she had barely noticed before. Her curiosity was piqued, but so was her amusement. She imagined each of her neighbors reacting to the arrival of a mysterious letter, some scandalized, some intrigued, some pretending ignorance while their eyes betrayed knowledge. The thought made her lips twitch with the faintest grin. Even in her quiet kitchen, a small thrill of anticipation pulsed beneath the familiar warmth of morning sunlight. Her gaze drifted to the letter again. Certain phrases seemed oddly pointed, as though referencing events from the past, events she had long considered resolved, or conveniently forgotten. There was the faintest allusion to the garden party last summer, the one where Mrs. Bloxby had dramatically dropped the trifle, leaving everyone flustered and scandalized, and yet something in the letter's wording suggested it might hold more significance than anyone remembered. Agatha's mind raced, mapping the threads of old gossip, private jokes, and minor disputes, weaving them into a tapestry that suddenly appeared much richer, much more tangled than she had anticipated. She could almost hear the gentle hum of village life outside, the distant bark of a dog, the rattle of a milk cart along the cobblestones, the soft murmur of voices through open windows. And yet, amidst this tranquil setting, the letter sat on the table as a quiet provocateur, demanding attention, inciting questions, hinting at stories untold. Agatha tapped the paper lightly again, a spark of determination igniting behind her calm demeanor. Whoever had sent this letter wanted something, perhaps to unsettle, perhaps to reveal, perhaps simply to provoke curiosity. Whatever the motive, Agatha Raisin knew she would unravel it. Slowly, carefully, and with the keen amusement that came from knowing a village full of secrets was about to be entertained by her cleverness. The letter remained on the table, harmless yet charged, a catalyst for curiosity. Agatha folded her hands over it, smiling faintly, knowing that the ordinary rhythm of her morning had shifted irreversibly. Something unusual had arrived, and Carsely, her village of tea, gossip, and gentle mysteries, was about to feel the subtle ripple of intrigue she intended to follow wherever it led. Chapter 2: Secrets in the Garden. Agatha stepped into her garden, inhaling the crisp morning air as sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting playful patterns on the stone path. The familiar sense of lavender, rosemary, and damp earth wrapped around her like an old friend. The small pond sparkled with reflections of the sky, and the soft buzz of bees in the flower beds reminded her that, for all its mysteries, life in Carsely still possessed simple, comforting rhythms. She often came here to think, to untangle her thoughts when the village's gossip or her own curiosity became too much to bear indoors. Her eyes immediately caught something that made her pause. Footprints, fresh and unmistakable, marred the soft soil near the back gate. They were small, neat, deliberate, definitely not hers, and certainly not those of any of the neighborhood children who occasionally wandered too close to her garden. Agatha's brow furrowed. Whoever had left them had been careful. but carefulness alone didn't mask intent. She leaned slightly forward, scrutinizing each print, counting the toes and noting the depth of the impressions. Whoever had walked here had lingered just long enough to observe, to study, or perhaps to leave a message. The thought made her pulse quicken, a delicious thrill running alongside her irritation at the breach of privacy. She wandered along the stone path, noticing other subtle disruptions. A pruning shears lay slightly askew against the shed wall, a watering can tilted at a peculiar angle on the edge of the rosebed, and a few petals, usually neatly fallen, were scattered as if someone had brushed past the flowers. Agatha tilted her head, scanning the garden from multiple angles. Nothing screamed danger, but the anomalies were enough to suggest that a visitor had been present recently. Her mind began ticking over, weighing possibilities: neighborly curiosity, a prankster, or perhaps someone with motives more obscure. A faint rustle of leaves made her freeze mid-step. She glanced toward the far hedge and caught a shadow moving swiftly before vanishing behind the lilac bush. The sight was so fleeting that she could not determine whether it was a person or simply the play of light and wind. Still, the fleeting glimpse was enough to ignite a mixture of curiosity and caution. Agatha straightened her back, planting her hands on her hips. "Well," she muttered under her breath, "it seems I am not as alone as I fancied." Her gaze wandered over familiar plants, each now seeming subtly altered by human intervention. The foxgloves that usually stood in perfect rows had been slightly disturbed, the small rock border around the herb patch was no longer entirely aligned, and the tiny ceramic birdbath had a faint smudge, suggesting someone had touched it. Agatha's mind danced with hypotheses, cataloging possibilities with the precision of a detective and the mischievous delight of a woman who loved puzzles. Even the half-shaded greenhouse seemed more ominous than usual, its glass panes catching the light at angles that hinted at someone having looked in from outside. Despite the tension, Agatha allowed herself a small chuckle. Her garden had long been a sanctuary, a place of calm, yet now it had become a stage for intrigue. The juxtaposition of beauty and mystery appealed to her sense of order and her innate curiosity. She bent down to inspect the footprints once more, brushing her fingers lightly over the soft soil. Each detail, from the depth of the prints to the slight smear of mud near the gate, told a story that demanded attention, yet refused to reveal itself outright. With a slow, deliberate breath, Agatha straightened and surveyed the garden as a whole. It was still serene, charming, and familiar, yet every small anomaly whispered secrets just beneath the surface. The plants, the shadows, and the scattered petals formed a narrative of subtle disturbances that beckoned her mind to wander, to imagine, and to anticipate. There was an observer, she was certain of it, and perhaps, just perhaps, the garden had begun offering its own clues, waiting for her to unravel them. Agatha straightened from examining the garden one last time, brushing a stray leaf from her dressing gown, when she heard a voice calling from the far side of the hedge. "Good morning, Agatha." Mrs. Bloxby's clipped, enthusiastic tones carried across the small distance. She was standing near her gate, a basket of freshly picked herbs balanced precariously in her arms, cheeks flushed from the cool morning air. Agatha waved, masking a flicker of curiosity behind her polite smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Bloxby," Agatha replied, strolling toward the gate. "Lovely morning, isn't it?" "Indeed, indeed," Mrs. Bloxby said, stepping closer. "Although, I must confess I've heard the most curious things lately. Strange noises in the garden last night, quite peculiar. Footsteps, I think, though I didn't dare look out. And there was that fluttering sound, like a curtain moving, only no breeze. Made me rather uneasy, I must admit." Agatha's eyebrows rose just slightly. "Curious, you say?" "Almost as curious as footprints I noticed this morning," she said lightly, keeping her tone conversational but letting a hint of intrigue slip in. Mrs. Bloxby's eyes flickered for a moment, betraying a brief pause before her lips pursed. "Footprints, you say? Well, one mustn't jump to conclusions, of course. The night is full of noises, foxes, owls, the occasional cat with too much energy. But still, I suppose it was rather odd now you mention it. Perhaps something or someone has been wandering about the village a bit too freely." Agatha nodded thoughtfully, her mind beginning to weave threads. "Yes, indeed. It seems the village may have secrets bubbling quietly under the surface. One cannot always tell who has been observing or who is, perhaps, testing boundaries. Her words were deliberate, almost teasing as she studied Mrs. Blocksby's expression. "I suppose that is possible," Mrs. Blocksby murmured, a faint tension creeping into her posture. "Although I dare say people often see what they wish to see. One's imagination can be quite active." She adjusted her basket and glanced away briefly, a telltale sign Agatha noted immediately. Something about the way she had hesitated suggested knowledge that might not be fully disclosed. Before Agatha could press further, another voice chimed in from behind the hedge. "Oh, do you mind if I interrupt?" It was Mr. Fenwick, the village's self-appointed source of all news and gossip. He emerged, a twinkle of mischief in his eyes and a notebook peeking from his coat pocket. "I couldn't help but overhear. Strange noises, footprints. You do know there have been whispers of odd happenings elsewhere too, yes? Odd letters, late-night visits, all very mysterious. But do tell who might be investigating." Agatha allowed herself a small smile, delighting in his theatrics. "Investigating Mr. Fenwick? I think curiosity is its own kind of investigation," she replied, masking her growing amusement while observing his eager anticipation. His presence, though light-hearted, served to expand the circle of possible connections, offering both subtle clues and comic relief in equal measure. Mrs. Blocksby shot Mr. Fenwick a sharp glance, as if scolding him for interrupting, yet her own composure was unsteady. Agatha's sharp eye caught inconsistencies. The way Mrs. Blocksby had mentioned noises without specifying times, the way she lingered on certain words while avoiding others, and her slight flinch when Mr. Fenwick brought up letters. Agatha filed these details away, mentally noting that some villagers may not be as forthcoming as they appeared, their statements carefully curated to conceal just enough to provoke intrigue. The three of them lingered for a few more moments, exchanging pleasantries, half-revealed observations and gentle laughter. The garden, once a sanctuary, had now become a stage where hidden stories and village secrets hovered just beneath the surface. Agatha watched closely, enjoying the dance of words and glances, each interaction hinting at possibilities she intended to unravel. Finally Mrs. Blocksby waved, hurrying toward her own gate, her basket swinging slightly. Mr. Fenwick lingered a moment longer, dropping a cryptic comment about everyone having secrets, of course, before vanishing down the path. Alone once more, Agatha exhaled slowly, feeling the garden shift in tone, from quiet retreat to a place threaded with mystery. She glanced down at the footprints again, the subtle disturbances now taking on a new resonance. Someone had been here, perhaps watching, perhaps leaving messages, and the village was far more entangled than her morning had suggested. Chapter 3: The Letter's Secrets. Agatha returned to her kitchen, the mysterious letter clutched carefully in her hands as though it were a delicate treasure. Sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating the wooden table where she spread out her collection of village papers, journals, and past letters. The ritual of investigation always began the same way: careful observation, gentle sorting, and a mental mapping of possibilities. The envelope lay open now, the paper smooth beneath her fingers, yet something about it seemed to hum with hidden meaning. She leaned closer, scrutinizing the letter line by line. At first glance, it appeared straightforward, but Agatha's sharp eyes caught subtle irregularities: a small swirl at the base of one capital letter, an almost imperceptible dot above a comma, the occasional ink blot that seemed more intentional than accidental. Symbols, perhaps, or coded markers. Her mind began to dance with hypotheses. Was this someone's clever whimsy, or a deliberate attempt to hide a message in plain sight? Either way, it demanded her full attention. Agatha reached for an old journal she kept from her days cataloging village events, flipping to a page detailing an incident from nearly a decade ago. A disagreement during the annual harvest festival that had ended in whispers but no formal complaint. She compared the phrasing in the journal with the wording in the letter, noting subtle echoes. A choice of words, the rhythm of sentences, even the spacing between lines. It was faint, nearly invisible to anyone but her, yet the connection sparked a thrill of recognition. A nearby stack of old newspaper clippings also provided context. She skimmed articles recounting minor scandals and misunderstandings that had rippled through Carsely in past years. Each account seemed innocuous at first, yet when paired with the letter, patterns emerged. Phrases repeated, names circled in her mind, small coincidences that could not be ignored. Agatha tapped her finger along the margin of the letter, imagining each subtle mark as a breadcrumb leading toward a larger revelation. Her gaze flicked to a tiny smudge near the bottom of the page, a faint lavender stain barely noticeable. Agatha smiled, noting the playful touch. Whoever had written this letter had a sense of humor, or at least a flair for drama. It reminded her of the way certain villagers preferred to communicate indirectly, leaving hints for those observant enough to notice. Her imagination roamed. Perhaps this was a call for attention, a gentle provocation meant to draw her in, or maybe a test of her deductive skills. Either way, she relished the challenge. Agatha's mind mapped out connections like constellations in a night sky. She pictured the festival incident, the neighbors involved, and the gossip that had subtly rippled across the village. Each mark in the letter could correspond to someone's known habits or quirks, the way they wrote, the words they favored, or the subtle signature of their personality. Even the choice of lavender-scented stationery felt personal, a small marker of identity she could almost place if she concentrated enough. Her lips curved in a faint smile as she leaned back, letting the pieces settle into a mental tableau. The letter was more than words on paper, it was a bridge to the past, a puzzle threaded through old conflicts, minor betrayals and village secrets that had lingered quietly for years. Agatha could almost hear the faint echo of whispered conversations from long ago, the rustle of paper, the clink of teacups, and the laughter and sighs of neighbors whose stories were intertwined with this very message. She tapped the letter lightly as though coaxing its secrets to reveal themselves. A subtle thrill ran through her, a mixture of anticipation and amusement. The task was clear: unravel the message, identify its creator, and decode its hidden significance. And so she began, methodical, observant, and entirely captivated, ready to peel back the layers of a puzzle that promised to reveal much more than anyone in Carsely might suspect. Agatha had just laid the letter carefully on the table, scanning its cryptic lines once more, when a soft knock at the door interrupted her concentration. She straightened, a subtle tension knitting her brow. Visitors at this hour were unusual, and the precise nature of this one could only be judged by the quality of their approach. The knock came again, gentle but deliberate, and with a deepening sense of curiosity she moved to the door. "Good morning," said a man's voice from the porch. "I hope I'm not intruding, Miss Raisin. My name is Mr. Caldwell. I believe we have a mutual interest." Agatha arched an eyebrow, allowing the faintest smirk to play at her lips. "A mutual interest, you say? Do come in, Mr. Caldwell. Please, do tell me what brings you here." She stepped aside, motioning toward her kitchen with casual grace, though her mind was already alert, cataloging every movement, every nuance of expression. The stranger entered, tall, with careful posture and eyes that darted ever so slightly, as if measuring the room for escape routes or hidden dangers. He carried no envelope, no papers, merely a quiet air of urgency and mystery. Agatha gestured toward a chair, and he lowered himself gingerly, his hands resting lightly on his knees. "I understand you received a letter this morning," he began, his voice polite but edged with something unreadable. "I may have some connection to it." Agatha nodded slowly, her eyes sharp. "Connection, you say? Curious. And yet you appear unwilling to offer any details. Might I inquire why?" He hesitated, glancing toward the window, then back at her. "It's complicated. Certain matters, old disagreements, unresolved events, make disclosure delicate. I assure you I have no intention of causing distress. Only guidance, perhaps." Agatha leaned back in her chair, tapping a finger against her lip, her mind whirring. There was something deliberate in his vagueness, a careful avoidance of specifics. Every pause, every indirect phrasing, was a thread she intended to pull. "Guidance, you say? In that case you might clarify one small point for me. Do you know who sent the letter?" Mr. Caldwell's eyes flickered, and he shook his head slowly. "I can't say. Not yet. only that it contains truths some might prefer to remain hidden. Perhaps even truths you yourself will find unsettling. Agatha's pulse quickened, not with fear but with the thrill of the chase. She studied him, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers brushed lightly against the edge of his coat, the subtle twitch in his left eye. Every gesture was a clue, every hesitation a hint of a secret he guarded fiercely. She made a mental note: evasive, possibly nervous, certainly intentional. This was someone accustomed to keeping information close, revealing only enough to provoke curiosity. "And do these truths," she asked lightly, allowing a smile to mask her probing, "pertain to the village? To familiar faces?" He nodded once, just enough to suggest affirmation, yet offered no names. Agatha felt a ripple of intrigue. The village, which had always seemed so gentle and predictable, now harbored layers of hidden stories, and Mr. Caldwell had inserted himself into the delicate weave, offering the faintest touch of insight. They spoke for a few more minutes, his answers always measured, always suggestive but never complete. Agatha noted each word, each glance, each subtle movement. The stranger's presence had shifted the room, adding tension without urgency, suspense without alarm. Finally Mr. Caldwell rose, inclining his head. "I should leave you to consider these matters. Perhaps in time more will be revealed. For now, observe carefully, Miss Raisin. The truth often travels in small gestures, not spoken words." Agatha nodded, her eyes following him to the door, noting the slight hesitation in his step before he departed. The letter lay untouched on the table once more, but the air of mystery had deepened. Every subtle movement, every careful phrasing, had added another layer to the puzzle she was determined to unravel. The quiet kitchen, once a sanctuary for contemplation, now felt charged with expectation. Someone, somewhere, had left a story in motion, and Agatha Raisin intended to follow it to the very end. Chapter 4: Shadows of the Past. Agatha found herself once again wandering the quiet corridors of the Carsely Village Archive, a small room tucked behind the local library. The scent of aged paper and polished wood enveloped her, comforting in its familiar reassurance. Rows of shelves, neatly labeled with faded tags, promised a treasure trove of forgotten stories. Here she could lose herself among the past, sifting through whispers and half-forgotten accounts, letting her mind wander between memory and speculation. She selected a few boxes she had not examined in years, brushing off dust with a delicate hand. Among the yellowed letters and brittle newspaper clippings, one volume caught her attention, a leather-bound journal belonging to a former resident named Eleanor Pritchard. Agatha's fingers traced the worn spine as she opened it, revealing pages scrawled in tight, elegant handwriting, ink faded with time but still legible. The entries chronicled ordinary village life, garden parties, small domestic quarrels, but certain passages hinted at undercurrents of tension, secrets whispered in hushed tones, and disputes that had never been formally resolved. Agatha smiled to herself, recognizing the familiar cadence of hidden drama. There was humor in the mundane, the way Eleanor described the battle over hedge-trimming duties with tongue-in-cheek flair, but beneath it lay a current of something more serious. One entry, dated nearly 10 years prior, mentioned a misplaced letter and a conversation overheard in the market square, phrases that made Agatha's pulse quicken. Could these be connected to the mysterious letter that had arrived at her kitchen table? The alignment was subtle but enough to provoke speculation. She leaned back in the wooden chair, letting her mind wander between timelines. Villagers she had known all her life appeared on the pages: Mrs. Bloxby, energetic and observant even in Eleanor's recounting, and Mr. Halliday the baker, whose whimsical remarks had occasionally sparked minor scandals. Agatha could picture each scene vividly: the laughter, the whispered disagreements, the subtle rivalries, all forming a lattice of human behavior that persisted quietly beneath the veneer of tranquility. Flipping further, she noticed discrepancies in accounts of certain events. One report described a theft of garden tools attributed to an unknown mischief maker, while another journal entry dismissed it as a misunderstanding, suggesting someone had deliberately covered their tracks. Agatha chuckled softly at the thought. Old disagreements and half-hidden motives seemed to echo into the present, leaving small ripples that now intersected with the letter's arrival. The village had always had its secrets, and some, she suspected, were far more enduring than the residents themselves realized. The journal revealed fleeting references to alliances and rivalries, friendships fraying under minor betrayals, and moments of heartfelt confessions quickly retracted. Agatha noted each carefully, connecting names and dates to her own observations of the village. Even trivial details, like who had hosted which tea party, or whose cat had disappeared for a few days, began to gain significance, forming a subtle map of human interactions that might hold clues to the current mystery. As she closed the journal gently, Agatha felt a familiar thrill. Pieces of the past were aligning in her mind with present disturbances: footprints, whispers, evasive visitors. The village, seemingly quiet and predictable, was threaded with stories that continued to shape behavior, create tensions, and offer hints for those paying attention. Agatha tapped her finger against the table, amusement and anticipation intertwining. A puzzle was unfolding, spanning years, and she alone was in the position to trace its faint but telling lines. In that moment, she realized the letter was more than a simple message. It was a thread connecting past and present, teasing secrets that had long waited for someone curious enough to notice. And Agatha Raisin, ever vigilant, intended to follow it wherever it might lead. Agatha had just returned from the village archives, the leather-bound journal tucked carefully under her arm, when she noticed a familiar figure approaching along the narrow lane beside her house. It was Mr. Pembroke, the local antique shop owner, a man whose polite demeanor often masked a sharp, inquisitive mind. He waved at her, though there was an almost imperceptible stiffness in his movements. Agatha tilted her head, noting the slight hesitation before he lifted his hat in greeting. "Good afternoon, Miss Raisin," he said, his voice smooth but carrying the faintest edge of nervousness. I happened to be in the neighborhood and thought I might call. Well, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Mr. Pembroke," Agatha replied, offering a warm, inviting smile. "Please do come along this way. I was just reflecting on some old village matters." Her tone was light, but her eyes missed nothing: the slight tremor in his fingers as he adjusted his coat, the way he avoided direct eye contact. As he drew closer, Agatha gestured toward a small bench beneath a flowering cherry tree. "Shall we sit? Tea perhaps? Or something stronger for fortitude in the face of old secrets?" she added with a faint chuckle, letting her humor ease the tension without diminishing the sharpness of her observations. Mr. Pembroke settled onto the bench, careful not to brush against her gloves or the table where a small vase of daffodils Saturday. "Yes, thank you," he murmured, though his eyes flickered repeatedly to the journal she still carried. Agatha noted the repeated glances, filing them away as potential clues. His posture was courteous but taut, as though anticipating an unseen question. "I imagine you've been busy, Miss Raisin," he began carefully. "The village does have a way of presenting puzzles, doesn't it?" Agatha inclined her head, her gaze steady. "Indeed it does. Some puzzles are small and amusing, like the disappearing garden gnome last summer, while others are more persistent, more personal." She allowed the words to hang in the air, watching as his fingers tightened slightly around the edge of his coat pocket. "Yes," he said quickly, then paused, clearing his throat. I might have heard something of late. Little murmurs, perhaps. Nothing concrete, of course, but enough to make one curious." His hesitation was telling. Agatha noted the careful avoidance of specifics, the almost imperceptible shift in weight as if ready to leave at the first hint of discomfort. Her smile was faint, knowing. "Curiosity can be an excellent guide, Mr. Pembroke, but it can also lead one to read more into events than is strictly present. Still, I find that small details, gestures, and words often reveal more than we realize." She tilted her head, letting her eyes linger on a plain silver ring he wore, a ring with a subtle engraving, the pattern reminiscent of a crest she had seen in one of Eleanor Pritchard's journal sketches. Mr. Pembroke's gaze followed hers and he shifted, a faint blush rising to his cheeks. "Ah, yes. Well, one does notice many things in a village as observant as ours. I suppose it's easy to draw connections that may or may not exist." Agatha's lips curved in a small, knowing smile. Connections often do exist, Mr. Pembroke. It's just a matter of discerning which are meaningful and which are coincidental. I have found the village full of both. For a few more moments, they exchanged polite conversation, the air between them charged with unspoken questions and subtle signals. Every gesture, every pause, every carefully chosen word became a thread in Agatha's mental map. When Mr. Pembroke finally rose, adjusting his coat with deliberate care, Agatha noted his reluctance to leave the vicinity entirely, as though he had been hoping for a slip, a hint, a word too revealing. "Thank you for your company, Miss Raisin," he said, tipping his hat again. I should take my leave now, but I shall reflect on what you've said." Alone once more, Agatha exhaled quietly, her mind alive with possibilities. The encounter had offered more than words. A nervous glance, a subtle gesture, a carefully placed ring, each a small but potent clue. The village's network of secrets had expanded in her awareness, threading past and present together with tantalizing promise. With every polite exchange, she felt the mystery deepen, the puzzle grow richer, and the promise of discovery more compelling than ever. Chapter 5. Hidden Messages Revealed. Agatha sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by a small fortress of letters, journals, and carefully clipped newspaper articles. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the scattered pages and highlighting the faint lavender scent lingering from the mysterious letter. She had been methodically comparing the contents of each document, noting phrases, recurring words, and tiny anomalies that might have escaped a less observant eye. Her mind worked with the precision of a watchmaker, threading connections that were invisible to most but vividly alive to her analytical imagination. As she shuffled papers, one pattern began to emerge. Certain letters shared subtle marks, little flourishes at the margins, ink smudges in consistent places, or faintly underlined words. At first, she had dismissed them as coincidences, but the more she scrutinized the documents, the more deliberate the marks seemed. Each was like a fingerprint, a tiny signature linking the letters, suggesting a correspondence network hidden in plain sight. Agatha tapped her finger thoughtfully on one underlined word. The repetition of phrases, the careful echo of certain expressions. Someone had taken extraordinary care to leave clues visible only to a discerning observer. Her mind wandered through the village and the people who might be involved. She considered Mrs. Bloxby, whose attention to detail had always been remarkable, and Mr. Halliday, the baker, whose penchant for subtle humor often disguised clever observation. Even Mr. Pembroke, with his nervous gestures and engraved ring, now seemed more than a casual participant in village affairs. Agatha's sharp eyes caught tiny consistencies between these individuals' behaviors and the subtle hints scattered across the letters. Patterns, she realized, were rarely accidental in Carsely. She smiled faintly at her own playful conjectures. "A web of secrets," she murmured, letting her imagination trace the invisible threads linking neighbors, old disputes and long-forgotten alliances. Each letter, each smudge, each cryptic phrase seemed to point not only to the letter's sender but also to a broader network of communications, a miniature village intrigue hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. Agatha leaned closer, comparing a newspaper clipping detailing a minor dispute at last year's summer fete with a journal entry describing a garden party gone slightly awry. There it was again, the same phrase subtly echoed, the same mention of someone's peculiar behavior repeated in both sources. Tiny details, almost imperceptible, hinted at a continuity of observation, as though someone had been cataloging events and weaving them into a narrative that now culminated in the mysterious letter she held. She traced a finger across the edges of the papers, noting the placement of punctuation, the angle of writing, and even the occasional tilt of letters. A faint pattern began to form in her mind, suggesting not just the author's intent but their personality, a meticulous observer, playful yet precise, careful to reveal only what they wanted noticed. The correspondence network was subtle, sophisticated, and intentionally obscured. It promised secrets, old grievances, and minor triumphs carefully encoded within everyday communications. Agatha leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly, her mind buzzing with possibilities. She felt the thrill of discovery, a delicious mixture of satisfaction and anticipation, knowing that each connection she had identified opened further avenues of inquiry. The puzzle was growing more intricate, the stakes, though never dangerous in the traditional sense, rising in intensity as the subtle network of letters, journals, and gossip revealed itself. She tapped the table lightly, a faint smile curling her lips. The mystery was far from over, but for the first time she could see the faint outline of the web. Someone in Carsely had gone to great lengths to communicate without being obvious, leaving delicate breadcrumbs that she alone had noticed. And Agatha Raisin, as always, intended to follow the trail, teasing out the hidden truths in her quiet, determined way, one meticulous observation at a time. Agatha climbed the narrow staircase to her attic, each creaking step announcing her ascent into a space she rarely visited. The dim light filtered through the small, dusty window, illuminating boxes, old furniture, and forgotten mementos that had accumulated over decades. The air smelled faintly of cedar and aged paper, a comforting combination that always reminded her of the village's quiet persistence through time. She ran her fingers along the edge of a wooden chest, feeling the smooth, worn surface beneath her palm, and allowed herself a small smile. This was her sanctuary for discovery, where the past whispered quietly, waiting for an attentive ear. She set down a basket for collecting her findings and opened the lid of the largest box at the far end of the attic. It was stuffed with letters, photographs, and small objects, souvenirs of forgotten conversations, minor triumphs, and petty grievances. Agatha's eyes brightened as she carefully began sorting through the papers, noting the familiar handwriting of old neighbors, the folded creases of letters once exchanged in secrecy, and the faint aroma of lavender that occasionally drifted from envelopes preserved for decades. Each item seemed to hold a fragment of village history, tiny threads weaving a more complex picture of relationships and alliances than anyone might assume. One envelope in particular caught her attention. Its paper was slightly yellowed with age, and the handwriting bore a striking resemblance to the mysterious letter she had received weeks earlier. She leaned closer, her pulse quickening, tracing the precise loops of letters and the distinctive tilt of the writing. It was unmistakable. Someone she had always considered familiar, someone she had trusted and even admired, was now implicated in the secret correspondence. Her mind raced, cataloging the implications, past events, private observations, and subtle manipulations that had previously seemed innocent now hinted at deliberate intent. Around the envelope were other objects, a ribbon from a long-forgotten garden fete, a cracked porcelain thimble, and a small carved wooden bird. Each seemed trivial on its own, but collectively they painted a picture of careful attention to detail, almost as if the sender of these items had wanted Agatha, or anyone curious enough, to piece together their significance. She gently lifted each item, turning it over in her hands, imagining the stories behind them. The conversations held in hushed tones, the minor arguments, the whispered apologies, and the concealed delights that had passed unnoticed in everyday village life. Agatha's eyes wandered across the attic, catching the sunlight on a dusty mirror and noticing a small pile of postcards that had slipped behind a chair. She retrieved them carefully, recognizing landmarks from around Carsely, each accompanied by faint scribbles and annotations. One particular note referenced an event from nearly a decade prior, a gathering where a minor scandal had erupted over a misplaced trinket. The handwriting, though slightly faded, echoed the same characteristics as the mysterious letter, confirming the connection and deepening the puzzle. A soft smile tugged at the corner of her lips. The attic, with its quiet corners and forgotten treasures, had once again proven itself to be a repository of secrets. Agatha placed the letter carefully on the table beside her other findings, feeling the thrill of discovery mingling with the cozy familiarity of her surroundings. Every envelope, every small object, every faint mark in the dust seemed to invite questions, teasing her curiosity while offering subtle answers. She leaned back against the wooden beam, inhaling the scent of old paper and polished wood. Patterns were emerging, connections forming across time, revealing a network of observations and intentions that had long remained hidden. The discovery confirmed her suspicions, illuminated previously invisible threads, and suggested that the village's seemingly tranquil surface was threaded with intrigue. And Agatha Raisin, ever meticulous and ever curious, felt a renewed determination to unravel the full story, one carefully preserved clue at a time. Chapter 6. Confrontations and Revelations. Agatha had spent the morning organizing her thoughts, aligning clues and tracing connections between letters, journals, and subtle village gossip. By midday, she resolved that the only way forward was to gather the key villagers whose names and behaviors had surfaced repeatedly in her investigation. Invitations were sent with polite discretion, each phrased to pique curiosity without revealing the gravity of her intentions. By the time the small group assembled in her sunlit sitting room, Agatha felt a mixture of anticipation and amusement. Mrs. Blocksby arrived first, fanning herself with an embroidered handkerchief, her expression carefully neutral. Mr. Pembroke followed, a nervous edge to his measured steps, eyes darting to every object in the room. Finally, Mr. Halliday entered, carrying a tin of biscuits as though presenting an offering to smooth the tense atmosphere. Agatha smiled faintly, welcoming them in her characteristic blend of warmth and subtle authority. "Thank you all for coming," she began, gesturing to the tea table. "I believe we have matters to discuss, matters that, though delicate, deserve attention." Her tone was light, yet there was an unmistakable undercurrent of intent. She poured tea, observing each movement closely, the tremor of Mrs. Blocksby's hand as she lifted her cup, the quick glance Mr. Pembroke cast at the corner of the room, and the slight frown that creased Mr. Halliday's brow despite his cheerful demeanor. "I received a letter recently," Agatha continued, producing the envelope with care, "one that hints at past events, connections, and perhaps secrets long thought forgotten. It seems someone among us has been particularly observant, recording minor happenings and leaving subtle markers for attentive eyes." There was a gentle intake of breath from Mrs. Blocksby, a slight stiffening from Mr. Pembroke, and a casual clearing of the throat from Mr. Halliday. Agatha's eyes twinkled as she took note of every nuance. "Now, I'm not suggesting mischief or ill intent," she added with a faint smile, "but curiosity has its own merits, and sometimes a question cannot wait until all possibilities have played themselves out." She proceeded to ask a series of pointed yet polite questions, each one designed to elicit small reveals rather than blunt admissions. Who had been in the village archives recently? Who remembered certain events from past fêtes or garden parties? Each answer was measured, but her sharp eye caught inconsistencies, a hesitation in phrasing, a slight avoidance of eye contact, or the repetition of certain words. Each subtle clue was logged in her mind like a precious annotation. As the conversation continued, fragments of truth began to surface. A half-admission from Mrs. Blocksby, a fleeting slip of memory from Mr. Pembroke, and a slightly exaggerated recollection from Mr. Halliday all hinted at hidden knowledge. Agatha's mental map grew richer with each detail, the web of interactions tightening around the letter's origin and intent. Finally she leaned back, letting a smile curl her lips. "I believe we are closer to understanding," she said softly, "and the truth, as always, will reveal itself to those patient enough to notice the smallest details." The villagers exchanged glances, some sheepish, others defensive, and Agatha felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. The first threads of revelation had been tugged, and she was already mapping the next steps in this delicate tapestry of secrets, wit, and village intrigue. Agatha had been patiently guiding the conversation, her mind alert for the slightest discrepancy, the faintest hint of truth hidden in evasive phrases. The villagers sipped tea politely, exchanging cautious glances, careful not to reveal too much. Yet as always in Carsely, secrets had a way of slipping out when least expected. It was a delicate dance, and Agatha's keen eye ensured she never missed a step. Mrs. Blocksby shifted in her chair, fanning herself with her handkerchief, as she recounted a tale about a garden fete that had gone slightly awry years ago. Her voice carried amusement, but there was tension beneath the measured words. "I remember someone leaving a note," she said hesitantly, pausing mid-sentence. "Not important really, just a bit of mischief, I suppose." Agatha leaned forward, her expression gentle but incisive. "A note, you say? Perhaps you could describe it? Its writing, maybe? Any peculiar scent?" Mrs. Blocksby's eyes widened slightly, and she bit her lip, fumbling with her teacup. "Well, Yes, I suppose it had a faint lavender scent. And the handwriting, it seemed oddly familiar, though I couldn't quite place it at the time. The room fell into a brief silence, broken only by the ticking of the small mantel clock. Agatha's mind raced, connecting the lavender-scented letter she had received with Mrs. Blocksby's slip. Every subtle detail aligned: handwriting style, scent, and timing. The breakthrough was unmistakable. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the thrilling clarity of deduction finally bearing fruit. "Interesting," Agatha murmured, letting a small smile tug at her lips. "And who, if I may ask, had access to leave such a note at the time?" Mrs. Blocksby fidgeted, her gaze flickering toward the window. It was Philip, of course," she admitted at last, the name tumbling out almost before she realized it. "I thought no one would notice, and I suppose I misjudged your curiosity, Miss Raisin." Agatha's eyebrows lifted in amused recognition. Philip, a familiar figure whose quiet demeanor and polite manners had never seemed suspicious, was revealed to be the orchestrator of the intrigue. The letter, the hidden symbols, the subtle references to past events, all pieces carefully positioned to tease attention and guide her curiosity. She suppressed a chuckle, appreciating the cleverness of the design. "So it was you," she said lightly, leaning back in her chair. "And the letter, it wasn't meant to alarm, only to engage, to test observation, and to remind us all of the lively web of connections in our village?" Philip nodded, a sheepish smile spreading across his face. "Exactly. I wanted to create a little exercise in attention, a playful reminder that even in a quiet village, one should never take things at face value. I didn't mean to cause worry. Only intrigue." Agatha allowed herself a gentle laugh, the tension dissolving into warmth. "Well, intrigue indeed. And you have certainly succeeded. The puzzle, the breadcrumbs, and the subtle hints have made for quite the morning." She looked around at the gathered villagers, who now relaxed, their own smiles easing the final threads of suspense. In the quiet aftermath, Agatha reflected on the lesson hidden within the playful ruse. Even small actions, small letters, and tiny gestures could illuminate connections, reveal character, and weave a tapestry of amusement and curiosity. The village, as always, was full of surprises, and the residents, with their quirks and secrets, were never dull. As the group began to disperse, exchanging cheerful farewells and light laughter, Agatha lingered for a moment, savoring the cozy satisfaction of resolution. The letter's purpose had been revealed, the author identified, and the mystery elegantly balanced between revelation and amusement. She felt a renewed appreciation for the charm of Carsely, its hidden networks, and the delightful complexity that made even ordinary days brim with intrigue. With the final threads unraveled, Agatha Raisin allowed herself a contented sigh. Another puzzle had been solved, yet the village still promised subtle mysteries, small delights, and gentle challenges that would keep her curiosity alive, and her cozy world endlessly engaging. Chapter 7: The Unexpected Twist. Agatha had just finished arranging her notes and files on the kitchen table, the lingering scent of tea and lavender blending with the faint aroma of fresh scones cooling on the counter. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, casting gentle patterns across the floorboards, and for a brief moment, the village seemed entirely serene. She allowed herself a small smile, believing the letter's mystery resolved, its purpose revealed, and the key players identified. The puzzle felt neatly concluded, a tidy bundle of intrigue tucked away among familiar routines. And then the knock came. A soft, deliberate rap, barely audible over the distant chatter of birds and the faint hum of a passing tractor. Agatha tilted her head, curiosity immediately pricking at her attention. Visitors at this hour were not unusual, but the timing was uncanny. She opened the door to find Miss Linton, the village schoolteacher, standing with an envelope clutched nervously in her hand. Her eyes were wide, and her posture suggested urgency restrained by politeness. "Miss Raisin," she began hesitantly, I thought you should see this. I found it tucked behind a book in the school library. I didn't know what it meant, but it seemed important." Agatha took the envelope, noting immediately the similarity in the handwriting to the previous letters. Her brow furrowed. This was unexpected, Miss Linton had never been implicated before. The neat script, the faint lavender scent, even the slightly angled loops of the letters, all aligned with clues she had carefully catalogued. Something about this disrupted the tidy narrative she had constructed. She invited Miss Linton in and set the envelope on the table, smoothing it flat. Her mind raced, rapidly connecting dots, re-evaluating her conclusions. Could the original letter have had multiple authors, or had she misattributed motives? She scrutinized Miss Linton's demeanor, the careful folding of her hands, the way her gaze lingered on the mantel clock, the slight twitch of a shoulder that betrayed nervousness. Each observation suggested hidden layers previously overlooked. "Tell me," Agatha said, her tone both gentle and incisive, "how did you come across this and why hide it until now?" Miss Linton fidgeted, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't mean to hide it. I wasn't sure it was my place to speak. But when I saw your investigation unfolding, I thought you should know. I didn't realize it might connect to, well, everything." Agatha nodded slowly, her mind already running through the implications. The new evidence suggested a broader network of correspondence, one that may have involved more villagers than she initially suspected. The initial assumptions, Philip as the sole orchestrator, the playful ruse resolved, needed revisiting. Patterns she had thought complete were now threads with loose ends, each requiring careful examination. A wry smile crept across her face as she considered the subtle humor of it all. Just when the puzzle appeared neatly wrapped, the village reminded her that life rarely adhered to simplicity. Even in quiet Carsely, secrets had a way of resurfacing, and curiosity never rested. She set aside the envelope, taking a deliberate sip of her tea, letting the warmth anchor her thoughts. The twist was subtle, almost mischievous, yet undeniably compelling. Agatha felt a renewed thrill, her detective instincts humming with anticipation. Here was a challenge perfectly balanced between intrigue and charm, demanding attention without disrupting the cozy rhythm of her home and village life. The morning sunlight continued to play across the table, dappling the pages of her notes. Agatha Raisin, notebook at hand, was already tracing new lines of inquiry, piecing together this unexpected development with methodical precision. The mystery was far from over, and the promise of discovery shimmered invitingly in the soft, lavender-scented air of her kitchen. Agatha sat at her kitchen table, spreading out every letter, note, and scrap of paper she had collected over the past few days. Sunlight streamed through the window, warming the tea beside her and casting playful shadows across the scattered papers. Each item, once a fragment of a puzzle, now demanded careful re-examination. Agatha's eyes gleamed with anticipation. This was the stage where everything could finally align. She picked up the latest letter from Miss Linton, inhaling its faint lavender scent. Comparing it with the original mysterious letter and the items from her attic, she noted similarities in handwriting, ink pressure, and even the occasional tilt of a signature flourish. Each tiny detail acted like a connecting thread, weaving together the separate strands of intrigue that had danced teasingly at the edges of her attention. Agatha leaned back in her chair, tracing connections mentally. Philip's playful misdirection, Mrs. Bloxby's half-admissions, Mr. Pembroke's nervous glances, all were now pieces in a larger pattern. Each villager had, in some small way, contributed to the network of observation and subtle communication that the letters had represented. The playful orchestration of clues, hints, and minor mischief formed a delicate lattice spanning months, even years, of village life. A faint smile curved her lips as she considered the charm of it all. The letter had not been meant to alarm or embarrass. It was an invitation to observe, to notice, and to participate in the village's quiet tapestry of secrets. Agatha chuckled softly, recalling the small absurdities that had arisen during her investigation. Misplaced garden gnomes, vanished ribbons, and whispered remarks that, at the time, seemed inconsequential. All of them now fell into place, each a tiny stitch in the broader fabric of Carsely's hidden stories. She revisited each clue, marking them lightly in her notebook. The attic objects, Miss Linton's envelope, the subtle symbols in the original letter, all coalesced into a coherent narrative. Agatha's keen eye detected the gentle humor woven into the letters, the playful nudges, and the hints designed to test her observation. It was clever, deliberate, and entirely in keeping with the personalities of those involved. Finally, Agatha leaned back and surveyed the full tableau. The letters were not merely correspondence. They were a mirror of village life, reflecting small rivalries, enduring friendships, and the subtle choreography of human behavior. The mystery had not been sinister, only intricate, a gentle game of wit, attention, and curiosity. Each minor clue, each evasive glance, each whispered rumor now made sense, contributing to a satisfying synthesis of events that illuminated the letter's purpose and the author's intentions. With a contented sigh, Agatha allowed herself to enjoy the resolution. The village's quiet charm remained intact, enriched by the playful complexity of its hidden dynamics. She refilled her teacup, chuckling softly at the memory of her own obsessive note-taking, and gazed out the window at Carsely's sun-dappled streets. The mystery had been unraveled, the final dots connected, and the sense of cozy satisfaction settled over her like a familiar shawl. Agatha Raisin, ever curious and ever observant, leaned back and allowed herself the rare indulgence of pure amusement. The village, with all its quirks and hidden stories, remained delightfully alive, a stage for small mysteries, laughter, and gentle intrigue that would never truly end. Chapter 8. Resolution and Reflection. Agatha sat by her kitchen window, the soft morning light illuminating her notes and the stack of letters that had consumed her attention for the past weeks. The tea in her cup had cooled, but she scarcely noticed. Her mind was alive with the final pieces of the puzzle. At last, the true story of the letter had revealed itself, and the culmination of her investigation felt both exhilarating and oddly comforting. Careful examination, combined with the village encounters, had led her to a conclusion that balanced surprise and inevitability. Philip's playful involvement had been only part of the scheme. The latest envelope from Miss Linton confirmed a more nuanced collaboration. The letters had been a gentle, elaborate way to draw attention to overlooked kindnesses, forgotten promises, and subtle connections between villagers. They were not messages of malice but carefully crafted reminders of community ties, small rivalries, and enduring friendships. Agatha allowed herself a soft chuckle, appreciating the cleverness of the orchestration. She reflected on each villager's role. Mrs. Bloxby, ever attentive to detail, had inadvertently nudged conversations in subtle ways. Mr. Pembroke's meticulous nature had left traces that helped her align patterns, and even Mr. Halliday, with his cheerful distractions, had contributed an essential thread to the web of intrigue. The letter's author, Miss Linton, had orchestrated the puzzle with quiet intelligence, testing observation and patience rather than creating harm. Each individual's quirks had shaped the narrative, proving once more that even the smallest behaviors could carry meaning. Agatha leaned back in her chair, letting the familiar comfort of her kitchen envelop her. The garden outside swayed gently in the breeze, birds chirping their morning songs as if celebrating the resolution of a long-running mystery. She reflected on the lessons embedded within the playful ruse. Attention to detail mattered, small gestures held significance, and curiosity, properly channeled, could uncover profound insights even in a tranquil village like Carsely. She considered her own reactions throughout the investigation, the overthinking of minor oddities, the delight in connecting disparate clues, and the balance between skepticism and trust. Each step had reminded her why she enjoyed these quiet mysteries so much. The world outside may have seemed ordinary, but beneath the surface, human behavior wove intricate patterns, full of surprises, humor, and the occasional gentle drama. A knock at the door drew her attention, and she smiled upon seeing Philip, Miss Linton, and Mrs. Bloxby standing together, carrying small baskets of scones, ribbon parcels, and a few sprigs of fresh lavender. They had gathered not for confrontation but for shared amusement and celebration, a quiet acknowledgement of the village's subtle intricacies. Agatha welcomed them with warmth, letting the conversation drift to lighter topics. The upcoming fete, a new batch of preserves, and Mr. Pembroke's latest antique find. The tension had dissipated, replaced by a gentle camaraderie that highlighted the cozy charm of community life. As the afternoon sunlight shifted, Agatha poured fresh tea for everyone, her mind still quietly cataloging observations. She noted with satisfaction that minor rivalries had softened, misunderstandings were clarified, and friendships reinforced. The letter, once a source of suspense and curiosity, had become a vehicle for reflection, laughter, and subtle moral lessons. A reminder that even in a quiet village, mysteries could teach and delight in equal measure. Finally, as her guests departed, Agatha sat alone, gazing out over the rooftops of Carsely. She allowed herself a contented sigh, the soft warmth of accomplishment settling over her. The village, with all its quirks, secrets, and hidden connections, remained a living tapestry, ever ready to offer intrigue and amusement. Agatha Raisin, notebook at hand and mind alert, felt the quiet joy of understanding, reflection, and the enduring charm of cozy mysteries in the heart of village life. As evening settled over Carsely, the village seemed to exhale a quiet sigh of relief. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow across the rooftops and cobblestone streets, while the distant chimneys curled wisps of smoke into the cooling air. Agatha sat comfortably in her favorite armchair, a steaming cup of chamomile tea in hand, feeling the day's events recede into memory like a gentle tide. The letters, the discoveries, the small dramas, they were all tucked neatly into her mental scrapbook, leaving her with a pleasant sense of accomplishment and mild amusement. She glanced around her cozy kitchen, noting the familiar clatter of teacups and the soft ticking of the mantel clock. The room, with its sun-faded curtains and neat stacks of books, felt like a haven, a stable anchor after the intricate dance of clues and revelations. Her cat, Marmalade, purred softly on the windowsill, stretching luxuriously as if sensing the calm that had returned to their shared domain. Agatha smiled, brushing her fingers through the soft fur, appreciating the simple comforts that framed her otherwise curious life. From the window, she could see villagers returning to their evening routines, Mrs. Bloxby tending to her rose bushes, humming an old tune, Mr. Halliday closing up his bakery, the rich smell of bread and pastries lingering faintly in the air, and Miss Linton carrying a small stack of books back to her cottage, walking with the light step of someone whose secret mischief had been gently forgiven. Carsely was alive in its usual, understated way, full of minor joys, quirks, and unspoken connections. Agatha leaned back, letting herself reflect on the day's adventure. The mysterious letter, the hidden messages, the playful deceptions, all had provided a delightful mixture of intrigue and humor. She found satisfaction not only in unraveling the puzzle but in observing the personalities and peculiarities that made her village so charming. Even the moments of tension had carried a certain warmth, a reminder that curiosity and human kindness often intertwined in surprising ways. A soft chuckle escaped her lips as she recalled Philip's sheepish grin, Mrs. Bloxby's flustered gestures, and Mr. Pembroke's nervous glances. The interactions, once fraught with subtle suspense, now felt like the gentle humor of an intricately choreographed play. Agatha sipped her tea, letting the warmth seep through her, and considered how such small adventures always seemed to find her, quiet mysteries wrapped in the ordinary routines of village life. As twilight deepened, the first stars twinkled above Carsely, and the village settled into its evening rhythm. Agatha set her cup aside, stretched, and allowed herself the rare luxury of pure contentment. The world felt cozy, familiar, and yet delightfully full of possibilities. With a faint smile, she thought of the letters, the puzzles, and the tiny revelations that kept her mind lively, already imagining the next quiet intrigue that might wander through her door. Marmalade leapt down from the windowsill, nudging her leg gently, and Agatha laughed softly. Carsely had returned to its serene charm, and for tonight, all mysteries were tucked safely away. She sank into her chair, letting the gentle calm of the village envelope her, knowing that tomorrow would bring routine, laughter, and inevitably, the next adventure awaiting just around the corner.